dig it tomorrow when it gets crowded. Yes. Okay, so we have a complete panel coming in, and we've got a pretty exciting group here. I am really excited about this. So first of all, I'm the least exciting part of it. My name is Rob Stolkowitz. I am a writer and sayer of things about comics. I write for Forbes, I write for Publishers Weekly, for ICB2, I teach at the University of Washington, among other things. And I'm just, right now, I've written a book about Comic-Con in large part about how the medium of comics and the genres that used to make up this place back, 40, 50 years ago, have transformed into the entertainment that is running our world right now. And as we know, when we adapt properties that originated in fan-favorite series, whether it's prose books or video games or comics, and it makes that journey to the screen, whether it's the big screen, the small screen, the handheld screen, and becomes a different kind of medium, sometimes that's the most awesome thing ever because those creators can deliver the experience that we have all been seeing in our heads when we've been enjoying that content. And sometimes they don't quite get it right. We've got 6 people here who, both from the creative side and from the production side, are people who are getting it right. So you may have seen, you may have heard of this show called The Boys that's coming out pretty soon. We've got a writer and producer of The Boys here, also from Preacher. We've got The Expanse. Was the big panel today? The big Expanse panel? It's tomorrow. So you're going to get a preview. So both The Boys and The Expanse are big panels that are going to be in later this convention. But we've got folks here representing those. We've got writers of some cool properties. So look, without further ado, let me go down starting from the far end of the table there. I think I see Jason. And actually, instead of me introducing you, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and just say your favorite predator, how do you want to frame your own experience in this area? So, just wanted to take it up.
Oh boy. Okay, Jason Brown here. I'm a partner and co-founder of Hivemind. A couple of the folks here on the panel. Executive producer of The Expanse, The Witcher, producer with Sean Scary Stories, To Tell in the Dark. And incredibly honored to have all these here at Comic-Con. I've been coming since I was 16, so this is a dream come true.
Sean Daniel, as Jason said, partners with Jason and Dinesh in Hivemind, and thrilled to be here for shows that we are incredibly proud of. And what can I say? It's been many years of doing this, and it is as interesting and challenging and exciting as it always has been.
I was perusing your resume before the panel, Sean. You haven't met yet, but I noticed that you were a producer or executive producer or something of one of my all-time favorite films, an American classic, Dazed and Confused. Am I right?
Thank you very much. I produced Dazed and Confused with Rick Linklater, of course, and my late partner, Jim Jacks, and we are very proud of that, and thank you for the compliment.
Well, moment of fanboy, I respect. In addition to all of the
Yeah, serious cool points on that, by the way.
Thank you. I can get that from my son as well.
I'm Jonathan Mayberry. I'm primarily a novelist, write horror thrillers, science fiction, fantasy, a bunch of things, and also a comic book writer for Marvel, IDW, and Dark Horse. And my first TV show was going to debut in December called V Wars, V as in Vampire, starring Ian Somerhalder from Vampire Diaries, and a bunch of other folks, including Peter Alderbridge, who's on The Expanse. And it's kind of bizarre to be in the space now where something I've written is becoming a show. That's new for me. And an EP on the show, which is nice, which they retroactively made me an EP, which is nice. I'll take it. And EP on 4 of the products I have that are in development that we're in post at Netflix on V-Wars.
Craig Rosenberg. I've worked mainly in features for my career until, like most writers, abandoned features and ran towards television a few years ago. So TV shows I've worked on, Lost, the network show Lost. I was a writer and producer on a show called Preacher. It was on AMC for the first 2 years, which is just coming up to its 4th year, which is going to be its final year. And after the 2nd year of Preacher, I went over and started writing and producing on The Boys, which is dropping on July 26th on Amazon.
I'm Robert Vendetti. I am a writer of comics and graphic novels. I work primarily for DC Comics now. I got my start in serialized comics working at Valiant with Dinesh. And my first graphic novel, The Surrogates, was a science fiction story that was adapted into a feature film.
My name is Dinesh. I was CEO and Chief Creative Officer of Valiant Comics. And I'm partner in HiveMind with Jason and Sean. And then most recently produced a film with Vin Diesel called Bloodshot. Coming out next February.
Awesome. So I want to start with Team Expanse here. Any Expanse fans in the house? Is anybody going to offer an argument to me that The Expanse is the best science fiction show on TV right now? Right. So this is an amazing show, and it's based off of an extremely well-loved and successful series of prose novels. And I'm just curious, so we've had a little bit of this conversation on an earlier panel, but walk me through like how did you come to this property, and how did you get to the point where you said, yes, we can do this justice in another medium, and here's how we're going to do it. So walk us through some of the origin stories.
Well, Expanse, the books are absolutely amazing. And I think we had read them, so did a lot of people. They were winning awards, and a number of folks were trying to adapt them. I mean, they just leap off the page. The characters are extraordinary. It's set in a kind of midway point in science fiction that we haven't seen a lot of between today and, a beautiful future in which, there's technology that we can't understand. And so it felt like it was moving the genre forward in a really remarkable way. For us, we felt like we knew how to put a team together around it. Sean had worked with Mark Ferguson and Mark Osby. He'd actually introduced them to Jon Favreau on a project that immediately preceded what they would all go and make, this little movie called Iron Man, which I don't know if that was.
No, actually, I was working with John developing a movie that never got made and then did get made in a not so short way. But we were developing John Carter of Mars, and Ferguson Osby. I introduced them to John, and we all worked together and came up with a great script that Paramount Studios didn't have the vision to make. But
this is not to be confused with the other movie that actually happened.
Right, exactly. We were exactly right. So we all moved on, and John and Mark and Hawk moved on to this quirky movie Iron Man, and the rest is history.
And then they went on to do Children of Men. They're really remarkable thinkers, and when we read the Expanse books, we just thought that they might, they had a great voice for that material and the credits and the prestige to bring a level of trust around launching the project. And so we approached the authors, but we did it in a very unique way, and then we came and we said, look, we don't want you to give us the books. We want to partner with you, hand in hand, to figure out how to build the absolute best way that we can adapt this. So, classically, Hollywood kind of comes in and tries to take things from people because Hollywood knows better, apparently. But immediately when we met Ryan Daniel and created The Expanse, they're dream partners. They're incredibly smart people, incredibly talented, very collaborative. So are Mark and Hawk. And so it just clicked. It was one of those incredible moments where we all just knew, beautiful things were happening and coming out of it. So that was how it originally came together. And then from there, with that team, we kind of built the show piece by piece, bringing collaborators, Lorraine Shankar, who joined the showrunner, Alcon, the studio, which was run by Sharon Hall. She developed Breaking Bad. She hadn't done a lot of science fiction, but she knows characters, she knows television. So everybody brought a piece of it, and building a team that can really succeed.
So to Jonathan and Robert, the original creators of stuff, has that also been your experience with collaborating with to see your work adapted? Does it feel like a collaboration? Are you guys an integral? I mean, each of you is of course a different case, but do you feel like your voices are heard in that process, or was it just we like your property, here's a check?
It started out as here's a check, go away, sort of thing. But what I found is that if you're not a jackass, you get a lot further with people than if you are. And I try not to be a jackass. So they made a couple of tentative reach outs to see, because there were going to be some deviations away from the source material. Source material were 4 shared world prose books and a run of comics that I did. And the show is based on my framing story for each of the prose books and on the comics. And there were some deviations that they wanted to make, and they wanted to see what my reaction would be. I later found it was purely a test run just to see how much of a pain in the ass it was going to be. And I actually thought they were smart changes, because to shoot it the way I wrote it would require about $25 million an episode, because it's a global catastrophe. You can't shoot a global catastrophe on that, they drilled it down to a more personal thing. That's my opinion, and I actually gave them a couple of notes which they wound up incorporating that made it even more TV-centric than book-centric. And after that, I got invited to the set more often. I got to see the dailies more often, getting the rough cuts and everything. So even though I was not officially an EP at the time, by being cooperative and being agreeable, and also understanding that TV is not a book. You can't put a book on TV. You can put a version of a book on TV. And so understanding that going in and making it clear that you get that opens the door for more communication, which is I think why they retroactively decided I should be an executive producer on the show. And now it's likely I'm going to write for the show next year. When I was a kid, by the way, Ray Bradbury gave me his 10 commandments on how to be a great writer. Don't be a jackass, don't be a jackass, don't be And I take that to heart.
Good advice in many life circumstances.
Yes.
To be sure. Robert, what was your...
For me, Surrogates was the first book I'd ever done. At the time I was working in the warehouse. Top Shelf is their guy who set up the booths and packed orders and things like that, and mailed out comic books to reviewers if you ever got a copy from Top Shelf, circa 2002 to 2008. I don't know when he packed it for you. And so when the production stuff started to happen with the film adaptation, I very much took an approach that was kind of hands-off, because I didn't want to feel like I didn't want somebody else to feel like I was managing their creativity, I kind of looked at it from the perspective of if somebody wrote a song and I had a band and I wanted to do a version of that song, but they told me it had to sound exactly like their version, then why would I really want to do it, right? They're all creative in their own mind, and they have their own inspirations and their own influences and their own things that they want to do. So I tried to be a resource, and they would call me sometimes when I consulted on the film and things like that, but I very much just enjoyed the process of seeing it develop. I'd already told my story, it was already in print, and it existed in that form. And so I really enjoyed seeing it get adapted into something else, and I was so new to it. I thought when I went to the set for the first time that they filmed a movie in the order in which you watch it. That's how little I knew, So just to sit back and watch it all happen, and to see all the machinery involved, and the catering trucks and all the stuff that comes in and that they do to make it, it's really quite extraordinary. So I just had a good time enjoying it, and also tried to take the attitude of if I want to make the movie a very specific way, then I should put up the $80 million, but I'm a little late right now, so if Disney thinks they need to do X to make their $80 million back, they kind of should feel free to do that, so I just kind of sat back and enjoyed it.
Can I just throw one last real quick thing on that? You mentioned that your version of it already exists. That's what a lot of writers don't get. Their version, it's not going to go away because they changed something for a show. Our version is still here.
Yeah. And it can't change.
And a lot more people will go to read it if it goes to a TV show or a movie.
For sure. Yeah, prior to Surrogates movie coming out. I don't know how many people here are familiar with Top Shelf. They've gone on to, they did March, which won the National Book Award, and they're a massively successful company. But at the time, it was the only sort of mainstream genre, full-color comic book series they'd ever done. And I mean, it sold, you know, a few thousand copies, but then the week the movie came out, it was a New York Times bestseller. So, you know, there's not really a downside to having something adapted like that, particularly if it's your first thing like it was for me. It opened up a lot of doors. And when I started working for Valiant, the editor at the time, the editor-in-chief, Warren Simons, he saw Surrogates. I'd given it to him years ago, and he read it, and I got, you know, a chance to pitch for Valiant based off that work. So.
Yeah, and this was a little bit before the gold rush, right? So this was like, the book came out in 06, 07, something like that.
Yeah, the book came out in
It was
06.
2011, so it was before the everything must be comic books.
Yeah, I want to say that I started that trend. No, but funny story, this is off topic. Man, I don't want to eat up a ton of time. But really, the movie went into production extremely quickly. We signed the contract on it in like August of 2007. The movie was in theaters in September of 2009. And it was because of the writer's strike. The screenwriters had turned in the screenplay like a week before the big writer's strike or something like that. And Bruce Willis's movie that he was going to be in called Pinkville got canceled. And so he didn't have any jobs, but he liked sci-fi, and there was a screenplay ready. And so now there's a movie, Surrogates is getting made. So people are always like, how do I get my book made into a movie? I'm like, I don't know, make sure there's a writer's strike. So things are only going to happen the way they're going to happen.
So, so Dinesh, you're in an interesting position because you've worked both sides of the fence on this, on the same property. So Dinesh is doing you're now executive producing the Bloodshot movie for Sony Pictures after having developed the Bloodshot property for Valiant. Talk a little about that.
Sure. Yes, so I was CEO and chief creative officer developing the Bloodshot movie with Sony for about 10 years. And then was fired from Valiant, which was fun, and then hired by Sony to produce the movie on behalf of Sony, and which is a fascinating experience, mostly because I negotiated very strong agreements on behalf of Valiant that I now was stuck with on the other side of the table. Little did I know I was negotiating against myself. But it was a fascinating experience because you get to see both sides of it, and it gave me the ability to protect the best interests of Valiant even from production. So I actually have the best of both worlds in that I have the power as the rights holder. It's the most powerful position is up until production is for the rights holder. And I have absolute power there to be able to shape the movie and control it and protect it and bring the right elements in. And then as the financiers start to put the money up, they become the most powerful element. And I shifted over to being a representative for them. And again, was able to see through to the final product the vision that Dave Wilson, our director, and Eric Heiser, our writer, and the casting crew were able to put together. So that was very lucky.
That's an interesting position to be on, especially in terms of how things shook out with Valiant and everything. So the film is coming out later this year? Or?
Film comes out for 2020. The studio has been very, very aggressive about making sure that we have the right release date, and they're very confident in it. There's a big marketing campaign starting later this year, and they've given us all the support we need, all the time we need. Very excited about the movie.
So how many people here are looking forward to The Boys, the TV show? Okay. I have seen the first three episodes of The Boys, and it rocks. It's really, like, if you like the comics, all of the stuff that made that series one, which to me, when I went down to my comic store, I would come home disappointed if there was not a new issue of The Boys that week. You know, it was one of the few series that got me back in there. And frankly, if you told me what it was about, like, I would be like, really? Like that? That's that interesting? And it's like, but Craig, you're really working with some dynamite there. Like, you've got a show that is, so Boys is kind of like Preacher, because it's Garth Ennis, is a very sort of profane, irreverent, sort of slam bang type of thing with layers and layers of stuff going on. How do you just talk about the experience, I guess, of adapting material where the writer's voice is so important to getting that right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, both Preacher and The Boys are really a reflection of the author, Garth Ennis, of his mind. It really comes out of his head, and he's very integral to that process. And so we're in the writer's room, and we're thinking about how do we adapt this process, and there's kind of two approaches. We can try to pretend we're Garth and see if that works, or we can kind of try to distance ourselves a little bit and say, well, we're creating our own version of Garth's comic and try to create it that way. And we felt like that in order to really do justice to Garth's comic in the end, that we had to create our own version of The Boys, which was faithful to a lot of elements in the comic book, but that also we have to recognise that we're making a different medium. That was going to necessitate certain changes in the comic book, but one of the interesting things that we could do though was that a lot of the things that Garth was kind of talking about in The Boys when he first wrote them became, over the years, even more relevant today, because The Boys is an examination of celebrity gone insane, I guess is one way of putting it. So celebrity corrupted and status corrupted. And then, as time moved on, we started moving into the era where celebrity became paramount in society, whether it's the Kardashians or politicians or any of these worlds. Celebrity seems to dominate now in a way where it didn't to the extent when Garth wrote it. So Garth was kind of very ahead of the curve. So what we kind of thought is what we need to do is embrace what Garth has done, embrace what he's done in terms of this satire, this very savage satire of celebrity and status, and bring it into this rich material, collide it with this rich material that we kind of now have in the contemporary world. So, there are certain elements in, as an example, in Garth's comic which kind of touched on what we now would call the Me Too world. But now is in a totally different context. The world is different now than it was 2 years ago. So what we thought was, we of course had a point where it's like, well, what do we do with that material? Do we do it too explosive now in this world? And we took the point of saying it's not. Let's make it part of the story. Let's bring it in, and let's look at all the different elements and the different attitudes people have towards these things, and make it a big part of the story. So we tried to kind of walk a fine line of creating our own show, but at the same time honouring what Garth did. And he would read outlines and let us know what he thought all the time. But the thing that we were really lucky about was it was very resonant in terms of its themes today. So we really didn't have to do enormous amounts of moving to get the material to be relevant for everybody today.
Different narrative medium. It's like when you're adapting a book or a comic or something like that, there is there's a narrative framework that you can translate into medium like film. How do you go about what elements are you extracting from a video game to make that narratively satisfying in a medium like film or TV?
It is important to note that on The Witcher is based on a spectacular, layered, rich series of novels and short stories. And so the show, The Witcher, is going to the literary material the way that, very much the way The Expanse did. And we are thrilled that there is that wonderful game out there and its legions of fans, and we think that what we're doing on The Witcher, by being true to what the stories are, will capture that, but we're not working off of the games.
Okay. So do you think that there's something in there that the fans of the game are going to watch the show and they're going to feel like this is part of the same thing that they want from the Witcher property, or is there going to be some period of adjustment, let's say, to the way that you're approaching it?
Yeah, so the games are also based on books.
Yeah, okay, right.
So,
fair enough.
So kind of integrally there is this same, working from the same text, both the games and us. With all adaptations, even with The Expanse, you are creating your own thing, very much the product of the creative teams involved in that particular vision. So with Witcher, I think the thing we always try to drive for is quality. What we want to make is a story that will move you emotionally and tell a story that you care about with characters who you love, and different authors, even within a show, when you have different writers, each writer has a kind of a different palette that they're working with. It's one of the great things about television is that we have a collaborative environment like that. In terms of Final Fantasy, since that is based on video games directly, one of the big things on that was that we had pitched using television as opposed to features as a platform for the story, in large part because we did feel like video games, often when you try to put them into movie form, get so compressed that a lot of the magic of the world and what you get to do in the game, when you're living and experiencing the world with these characters, is better represented in a television form. I actually started as a video game critic, so I came up working at GameSpot and looking at the sometimes fraught interrelationship between Hollywood and the video game world. And I think one of the things that when Hollywood thinks about video game adaptations, they don't realize is that video game fans love film and television. They are some of the savviest, most sophisticated viewers, and really, if you're making something for them, it can't be, in a sense, fan service product. Not to say we don't love fans, but I say it's got to be great. It can't just be something that's cynically, utilizing the brand name. It has to be something that really adds to, the experience that you've come to love, in your own relationship with these properties. So, for us, we felt like with Final Fantasy, you're integrally following characters, over a very, very long period of time and becoming attached to them. And then we felt like television would be a very organic way to explore that. So we hope to be able to bring that to the world soon.
Do we have questions from the audience?
I just want to add, Jason touched on something. This is about producing, regardless of what your IP is or what you're building from. What emerges, whether it's a movie, whether it's a series, streaming series, whichever platform, in today's world, what you end up putting in front of you guys, it actually has to be good. You have to figure out a way for it to be good. Because if it isn't, there is just a whole lot of other things that the audience can choose to do, that people can do with their time. There's wonderful, wonderful things to watch wherever you turn. So it is upon all producers and everyone involved has to figure out how something emerges with integrity, with its own integrity, and is in its own way riveting.
Yeah, actually, that also speaks to the creator's point of view when somebody is trying to option something. Alcon Pictures had come to me to option my young adult series, the Rotten Rowan series, and it was one of 3 options on our table at the time, and they were all good options. But I was a huge fan of The Expanse, and I loved the books. I was skeptical they could do a TV show of it, and you guys did a great TV show of it. And the sophistication and subtlety of it showed that they got the core material, not just the events of the story, but got what the books were about. And that led to some interesting creative discussions with Carl Lewis and Broderick Johnson at Alcon, where clearly, when I went up to their offices, they hadn't just heard of the book or just want to acquire it. The co-CEO, Broderick Johnson, came out of his office with a copy of my book with like 500 post-it notes all over it. He was asking questions about nuanced story elements. They got it. And it's that made me choose one company over another, because I really do think that there is a respect on their part for the material that I love. And without that respect, it's just a paycheck for an option, and it's not something that becomes an optimistic view that something wonderful could actually happen with a property that I care so much about. So both sides of this are really important, and respect has to be there, and insight into the material has to be there.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with genre material where, honestly, a lot of what people like about this stuff sometimes is the atmospherics of it. Is the creepiness and the setting of the horror. or the superheroics and the action stuff, or those sorts of elements, and we can all think of less successful film and media adaptations of these things that really put all of their effort into getting that stuff right and miss these things that are at the center of the story, I think. I don't know if that's leading to a question, but I know that you guys are all working on these kinds of projects. In the production process, where like the showrunner and the writer's room and everything like that, how much attention is paid to those sorts of things and nailing those character interactions and stuff like that? Greg, do you have?
Yeah, we do a lot of freaking time. we sweat blood over all that stuff, because I mean you have in The Boys you have a lot of fantastic spectacle and set pieces, but if we don't get those character relationships right, nobody's going to care. It'll just be a very empty experience for everybody. But I wanted to mention, in terms of the kind of storytelling nature of it, I mean, what's really interesting to me is that storytelling has become so much more sophisticated over like the last 30 years that comics now, I think, are coming into their own in television and film, because television and film has kind of caught up with comics in a sense. Because comics used to be able to, one of the things I loved about it when I was a kid is you would have these wild, diverse movements and shifts in tone in a comic book. You could go from comedy to an action piece, and it would all kind of work. And in the 60s and the 70s, when they were trying to do that on TV, they didn't really know what to do with it. And the TV shows kind of, they became very tame, and they became very cheesy. But now audiences are so advanced and so sophisticated in the kinds of things that they can watch and put together, that you can now take all of those comics, which are very sophisticated in their storytelling, and bring them into this medium, and audiences will go along with it. So, for example, I remember on Preacher, we would have these incredible shifts in tone, from ruminations, philosophical ruminations on the nature of God, then we'd have some goofy comedic moment, and then we'd have an action set piece, and it all kind of worked. And it felt to me, the closest that I had ever seen something to a pure comic on television, where we could really capture all those tones and it wouldn't feel jarring. So it's really, there's really, I think, been this incredible movement in storytelling, where now you can tell a story backwards, you can tell a story from multiple points of view, you can tell a story that begins in Preacher. We would start something in the Wild West, or we would start something in ancient historical periods, and then jump 2,000 years. You can do all these incredible things now because audiences are very used to it, and they enjoy it, and they're ready to go along with it. So it's great in the writer's room, because it challenges us to come up with really interesting and new forms of storytelling that match the unique nature of these comics, and that live up to what audiences are experiencing.
So, in terms of questions, do you prefer that they go up to the microphone, or can we just raise hands and ask this young lady in the front?
So this is about what's the sound?
Speak up. Project.
I'm not sure the mic's on, is it?
I don't. Is it?
Yes.
This is about The Expanse. So I'd heard about The Expanse, but never saw it. And then I saw the panel at Emerald City in Seattle, and spent some time talking to Jason, and really wanted to watch it. So we started watching it, and we couldn't stop. And then when it was over, we were so disappointed, like, when's the next one? But my question is this: if I remember correctly, during that panel, there was some discussion about, there was a concern that at some point that it may not get made at all, or that there was a budget issue or something like that, and that you couldn't actually do everything that you had hoped to do because there was a budgetary concern. Am I remember that correctly? And all I could think about when I watched this is, what else could they have done? I mean, what would they have done with more money? I mean, what didn't you do? It was so amazing. I was like...
That's Flesh, right, Jason?
No, thank you so much for coming to that panel and for taking that. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It's so great. Yeah, it was more that we didn't think we could. That's the honest answer. Is that when we when we first started putting The Expanse together, and Sean jump in, but we thought we were going to need a lot more money. And the reality is we actually do. It's that the show exists because a huge number of people work so far above and beyond and work so hard to bring it to life. The team in Toronto who make it work harder than any crew I've ever seen, and work as a team. Our showrunner, Rain Shankar, has really fostered this collaborative mentality. The authors are part of the team, so whenever there's a problem, the whole family kind of sets up to solve it, which ultimately happened when the show got canceled and we all thought it was over. And our family then extended to all the people who were watching it and then helped us survive and come into a new life. So the show's been really blessed.
And just one other note, again, about producing, there is always a budget issue.
So I didn't know that. So what happened was I started crying, true story. And I called Sean and I said, "There's no way, it's not possible. We can't do it." And Sean said, "Yeah, no, we can."
Good partners.
Yes.
So first, I just wanted to say, Robert, I'm a big fan of your Hawkman comic.
Thank you. Appreciate
Very
that.
underrated. Everyone should check it out. I had a question, I guess for Jason, but for anyone really. I'm just really fascinated by the idea of video game adaptations into movies and TV, and it feels like that could be the next sort of comic books in terms of things being adapted. Why do you think in the past it's been so hard to do good video game adaptations, and what do you think is changing to create things like The Witcher or Final Fantasy that maybe you're approaching it differently?
Television.
Yeah, I mean, in part, that's really true. It's that, television has now become an extraordinary medium for world creation. And, that has happened in the past, Star Trek, Battlestar, shows like that. But we've entered a new era where you can do that with an ever-increasing level of sophistication. And so some of the more complex worlds that exist in games can now be brought to life with the narrative scope and depth that television allows. And that it feels like a really compatible set of circumstances that you have, incredible genre. Not that all video games are genre shows, but you have a level of talent in television that can also execute that, and is now able to, I think, bring those worlds to life in a new way. But Dinesh, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it in timing as well.
Yeah.
Like Lustig and Thornton, the writers on Final Fantasy, they grew up with the storytelling of video games, and it hasn't been long enough. Video games are newer medium. If you look at comic books, Sam Raimi was such a huge influence in Spider-Man. He grew up with Spider-Man bed sheets or something, consuming that storytelling and then adapting it. So I think it's now we're seeing filmmakers and writers that grew up with video games that have been thinking about how to bring this to the screen.
Something that I would ask you guys is so because you're doing so much of this rich world building stuff, it imposes, I think, kind of a responsibility to land the plane right, because if you get everybody invested into the mythology of this world, and especially, when you're adapting properties like The Boys or like The Expanse, which, where the narrative works actually are going to have an end, and that the people who've been through those know what the ending is, TV wants to have another season. I guess is that sense of closure that you have to build into the world. Is that something you have in the back of your minds, or you're just trying to get through this arc, get through this season, and then we'll sort of eventually let the conclusion take care of itself? What are the pros and cons, I guess, of a closed and an open-ended world-building approach? So, Greg, you worked on Lost as well as the others.
Yes,
so you have
the best example discussing that context. Might move on to Preacher and The Boys in that context. in both Preacher and The Boys, they do. They're a series of comics. They have a beginning, they have a middle, and an end, and we don't know how long the shows are going to last. So we've got to try to figure out in the writer's room, how long are we going to make these story arcs last for. But there's so much material in those comics. I mean, you could go for 10 years, honestly. There's so many story arcs in those, if you guys are familiar with them. It's not a shortage of material. It's the problem is us figuring out of these good, cool stories, which ones do we want to use and how do we kind of make them serialized and make them work together. There's a lot of stuff that we can use. So, when we're in the writers' room, we talk broadly, about each season. So we kind of come up with, what we want, whether it's Preacher or The Boys, how we want the season to play out, how we're going to end everything. And we know, we will have general discussions about, end points down the road. But they can change too, as the best idea wins. So if we have an idea at in season 1, and then in season 4, maybe someone will better that idea. So you've got to be open to that also. You can't be too rigid with your storytelling. So yeah, we have kind of, I would say, general guidelines, general guideposts that we're trying to hit, but with the ability to shift if something else comes up that we love even more.
So the showrunner, Eric Kripke, actually has a number in mind that he told me in an interview that's going to break tomorrow in Forbes, so go check that out if you're curious what his thought on the scope of that series is going to be. Sorry, go ahead, sir.
Hey guys, so while you were in the writers' room discussing character interactions like inner conflicts and all that, is there somebody else who's thinking about the way things will actually happen on screen? Like, for example, if things will be sold out through action sequences and set pieces, like is there somebody who's like, okay, that's great, but we need this to be visual, right, and to have action? And so I guess my question is there someone in the staff who's in charge of drawing the logistics and the action around everything that's going on between the characters? How does that process work?
The scripts are very detailed on The Boys, and they were on Preacher too. I mean, they were very visual. We would spend a lot of time thinking about our visual transitions, even from scene to scene, in terms of shots and things like that. So they were very detailed on both those shows. And then, of course, a director will come in at a later stage, when we're in production, and then they'll have some great ideas too that we can incorporate. There's a lot of changes that come in when they say, "How about we do this, this, and this?" And we'll definitely make those changes if they improve everything. So, the script is the template that everybody is working from, the director and production. That's the Bible. But again, best idea wins. Somebody comes in and says, what if we do this, handheld instead of your idea that you had? Then we would totally go along with that.
Thanks.
Hi. I'd like to ask the panel, you've been speaking a bit about the challenges and pitfalls of adapting, especially large canvas stories, often a series of novels where there's like 9 books or a wealth of material. I wonder if you could speak to the challenges of selling such a thing to a production company, a studio, or a body where good luck getting them to read a pilot script, much less 9 books. Did you find that you had to write the script, write a pilot first and take a flyer, or is it that you found a company where there was already an executive there who was familiar with the material? I ask as a fellow professional. Thank you.
I'd like to throw something on that real quick. I tend to write series, and I have a lot of books out, a lot of series. So when Alcon was was interested in Rotten Ruin, there's 4 original novels, a graphic novel, a book of short stories, and then a spin-off series. And there's no way they read all of that. One of the things that we writers get told a lot by our agents is, Hollywood doesn't read. It's not true, but they can't, for the most part, they can't read the entire body of work on something. I have a series with 11 novels in it. There's no way they're going to read that 11 unless they've already bought it. So usually, when I'm
even not then, let's be honest.
Yeah, and even not then. When I'm preparing a pitch with my agent, what we do is we focus on either one book in the series that we feel defines the series, or one storyline in a series. Like with V-Wars, it was not the entire first book. It was one storyline in that book that became the first season of the show. They later, once they acquired it from that pitch, They later added elements from other books and from some of my comics as well. But what we sold it on was a concept easy to grab, easy to understand and build on. And we distilled it down to a series of conversational points that can be pitched quickly in a room, that we can get some mutual understanding going. And then once that process of this executive and that person gets involved, then they start looking at, well, what else is there? What can be our second season? What can be our third? And that's when somebody starts reading more of the material. But early on, everything I've done, we've stripped down.
You need good producers, man. That's honestly what it is. Executives are too busy. It's not their fault. There's too much material. You need good producers that they trust. They're going to find a way to get them to read it. I'll tell you, Amanda Cruz is in here somewhere. She was at Highmind as well. Where's Amanda? Right there. She came up with a great idea. We have this biopic we're doing on the life of William Gaines, who's a seminal figure in comics. And it's not only his life, it's his dad's life as well. EC Comics, Mad Magazine, Senate hearings, all this information. How are we going to get? There's no book for it either. How are we going to get people to understand this information? Amanda's working with a comedian to build a 45-minute class. It's literally, you come in, no one does this. They come in, they sit down, and this comedian walks them through. It's funny, there's visuals. They walk away with all the information they need. It's any way you can figure it out, and that's what good producing is.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say, when we took Expanse out, we spent maybe 6 months working with Mark Knock, on a pitch that we then took right to all the different networks and studios. And it took us 6 months to figure out how to distill down, what at the time was 4 books of 9, many of which hadn't yet.
And such a cast of characters.
Huge, yeah, and we really had to figure out what do we talk about and for how long. And it took that long to boil it down into, it was almost like a poem, So and they just read it. Every single word was incredibly intentional, and actually people cried to the pitch. Well, we still hear about it. People come up to us and say, "Oh my God, I remember when you brought the Expanse. It was so emotional." And the secret really is that it's an emotional decision to buy something for most of these buyers. And it's the story, it's also the trust of the people involved. We're really mindful of that when we were building the team. It wasn't just a good pitch, but it was a really good pitch by an Oscar-nominated writing team with River Children and Iron Man. So we thought about all of that, and it was really intentional. And as Dinesh is saying too, each project requires kind of a slightly different way to do it. We've never done it the same way twice, basically.
We build this panel as secrets of successfully adapting these things, and you just got a secret. Do your pitch as a comedy routine or as a poignant, emotionally charged, condensed poem.
I'd also add that the executive might not have read the entire series of books, but they can read the New York Times bestseller list. And that's how they'll go and sell that to their boss by not saying, I read these 5 books, they're amazing. They'll go and say, hey, check out the bestseller. This is like number 6 on the bestseller list. Because everybody has to do their selling. We sell to the producer sells to the exec has to sell to the head of the studio. So, the fact that we have this IP is very helpful, very, very helpful, because it gives them something tangible to be able to say to their bosses, this exists, people like it, look, it's on the bestseller list. And it's helpful, and that's why, in terms of, comic books turning into movies and TV, comic books are becoming increasingly valuable as intellectual property becomes increasingly valuable for the studios.
I would just add that everybody does read. They take it really seriously at all levels, from the writer's room to the studios to the networks. So the words and the stories that they then yield are really carefully and rigorously read and thought about and debated.
Yeah,
I
I think when you, I was going to,
I was going to say, we have time for one more question. If there is one more question, we'll take it. If not, I will ask each of our panelists to sort of go down in order and where. Do you have a question? Go for it.
So
So there are an amazing number of opportunities, that's true, but in the last 4 hours, there was a 9.0 earthquake that was called Netflix's earnings. How much do you think that's going to change the party?
What happened with Netflix?
They lost 180,000 subscribers, and their forward guidance is that they do not expect growing numbers.
You know, you got to admit that what we all heard was there was a 9.0 earthquake. So everyone was like, whoa, where?
Well, that's a different pitch. I'll see you after.
I mean, the reason it's declining, or one potential reason it's declining, is because there's now a variety of streaming options for people. So there's going to be Disney Plus and Warner's and Universal. They're all going to have their streaming. So I don't think it represents a disaster. I think it's a huge opportunity with especially as the streaming services are beginning. I think there's massive opportunities because, especially when they're beginning, they need to get out and establish their brands, and I think they're going to be desperate for content. So I think that it's an opportunity, as they say.
Plus, Netflix is going to have this incredible new show, The Witcher.
Great, so to wind up here, because I think we're at the end of our hour, I'd like to thank our panelists and just give you one shot, come down the aisle here and tell us where can we find the next cool thing that you're doing, whether it's here at this convention or that's going to be out in the world. So any time frame on Expanse or any of the stuff you're working on, Jason?
Well, we actually don't know the release date of the next season of Expanse of The Witcher, but we have Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark coming out. I don't know much about it. That's coming out August 9th. In theaters, really proud.
I'm actually editing New Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, a tribute anthology.
No way!
Yeah, for HarperCollins. And I've got more panels tonight, Psychology Cult TV, Room 25 ABC, and then Weird West, also over in that general direction. So, whatever.
The Boys is dropping Amazon July 26th, first season. You will love it. It's amazing. It's something you've never seen before. I'll say that. Cool. Check it out.
Hawkman and Freedom Fighters come out every month from DC, so they're always in shops, and I'll have some new projects that'll be announced pretty soon as well.
Hawkman's awesome. I co-signed that. Witcher, The Expanse, Scary Stories, and then Bloodshot comes out February 2020.
Outstanding. Let's hear it for our awesome